I was adopted into a loving, wealthy family. I just found the contract. I wasn't an orphan they chose, I was an asset they purchased from my birth mother to be a genetically compatible organ donor for their biological son, should he ever need it. My parents' love has always been the one absolute, unshakable truth of my life. It is a grand, benevolent force, a weather system of kindness and support in which I have lived for all 22 years of my life. I am Ava Harrington, and I'm the luckiest adoptee in the world. The Harringtons chose me when I was 6 months old. They are everything you would picture when you hear the phrase old money. Our house is a beautiful, sprawling estate with gardens that smell of lemon oil and history. My mother, Eleanor, is grace personified, a woman who can calm any storm with a gentle hand on your arm. My father, Richard, is my quiet champion, a man whose pride in me is a tangible thing I can feel from across a room. And then there is my brother, Ethan. He is their biological son, a year older than me, my best friend and my co-conspirator. Our bond is the stuff of family legend. Ethan was a sick child. A rare kidney condition in his early years cast a long, terrifying shadow over the family. But he had, in my mother's words, a miraculous recovery. His past frailty is now just a story, a testament to the strength of our family. It is the reason, they told me, they chose to adopt. They had been through the fire of potential loss and wanted to give a child the security and love they felt so blessed to have. My life has been a fairy tale. I have wanted for nothing, not for comfort, not for opportunity, and certainly not for love. I've always known I was chosen, a fact that made me feel not like an outsider, but like the most precious, deliberate part of our perfect family. Today, that fairy tale ended. I'm applying for a postgraduate program abroad, and for that, I needed my original birth certificate and adoption records. My father, with his usual easy trust, gave me the combination to the large mahogany-paneled safe in his study. "Everything you need is in the family file, sweetheart," he said with a smile. Inside the cool, dark interior of the safe, I found the file easily. I saw my official adoption decree, the document that had made me a Harrington, and I smiled. But beneath it was another document, a thick one, bound in a dark blue legal cover. It was titled Ancillary Medical Agreement and Asset Purchase. Asset purchase, the phrase was cold, corporate, utterly alien in the context of our loving family. I thought it must be related to a business dealing, perhaps misfiled, but the names on the agreement were not corporate entities. They were Richard and Eleanor Harrington, and a woman I had never heard of, my birth mother, and me referred to not by name, but as the asset. My hands trembling, I read the first paragraph. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was as clear as a shard of glass to the heart. This was not an adoption agreement. This was a purchase contract. My birth mother had been paid a substantial, life-changing sum of money. In return, the Harringtons received full legal guardianship and, more importantly, complete and irrevocable medical proxy over me. Then I saw the clause, the one that made the blood roar in my ears and the perfectly curated world around me dissolve into a cold, terrifying void. The asset, confirmed through genetic testing to be a compatible match, see Appendix A, is to be raised in the Harrington home as a daughter. In the event of organ failure, specifically renal failure, on the part of the designated beneficiary, Ethan Harrington, the asset will be made available for all necessary medical procedures, including organ harvesting and transplant. This agreement supersedes any and all personal objections from the asset. The document went on, clause after chilling clause, outlining their rights to my body, my biology. It was a meticulously crafted insurance policy. A preemptive claim on my kidneys, my bone marrow, my very bloodline.
The love, the comfort, the privilege. It wasn't a gift. It was a well-maintained environment for a very precious investment. My brother wasn't my best friend. He was the beneficiary, and I was his living, breathing spare parts collection. The mahogany-paneled study, once a place of warmth and security, became a cold, sterile courtroom. I was the prosecutor, the victim, and the jury, and the document in my hands was the sole damning piece of evidence. The love I had believed to be the foundation of my life was revealed to be a transaction, a well-executed business deal. My entire existence was a contingency plan. My mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, tried to find another explanation. This had to be an old, archaic document, a relic of a less enlightened time, a plan that was never meant to be enacted. Ethan's miraculous recovery, that was real. He was healthy. The crisis had been averted. The contract, therefore, was moot, a ghost of a nightmare that had never come to pass. I clung to this, a desperate, flimsy shield against the horror. But the final page of the contract shattered even that defense. It was an addendum, dated just 5 years ago, on my 17th birthday. It was a legal reaffirmation of the original agreement, a clause that extended their medical proxy over me into my adulthood. They had updated the insurance policy. The threat wasn't in the past. It was a quiet, sleeping monster, and it was still very much alive. I heard the sound of my mother's voice in the hallway, a cheerful, melodious sound, calling my name. "Ava, darling, did you find what you were looking for?" Panic seized me. I scrambled to put the documents back, my hands clumsy, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. I shoved the asset purchase agreement to the bottom of the file, a futile attempt to bury the truth. I grabbed my adoption decree and my birth certificate, the innocent documents that I had come for, and I closed the heavy door of the safe, the sound of the tumblers clicking into place like the locking of a prison cell. I walked out of the study, a perfect imitation of my normal self plastered on my face. "Got them," I said, holding up the papers with a bright, false smile. My mother, Eleanor, looked at me, her head tilted slightly, her gaze sharp and analytical. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I thought she could see right through me, that she could see the wreckage of my world in my eyes. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "You look a little flushed." "I'm just excited," I lied, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "The application is the last step. It's all becoming so real." The lie, like all lies in this house, was accepted. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that now looked like the practiced ease of a master manipulator. "We are so proud of you," she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. Her touch, once a source of unconditional comfort, now felt like the proprietary gesture of an owner inspecting their property. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-vigilant detachment. I was an anthropologist observing the rituals of a strange alien tribe I had once believed to be my own. I watched my father, Richard, as he read the evening paper, a man of quiet integrity who had signed a contract to purchase a human being. I watched my brother, Ethan, as he laughed at a joke on television, my best friend, my co-conspirator, the boy for whom I was a designated sacrifice. Did he know? Was he part of this monstrous secret? Or was he, like me, just another character in our parents' carefully crafted play? Every act of love, every gesture of affection was now a source of torment. My mother's praise for my academic achievements, was she proud of me? Or was she pleased with the high quality of her investment? My father's concern for my health, his insistence that I take my vitamins and get enough sleep, was it paternal love, or was it a farmer tending to his prize livestock?
But it was inextricably tangled with the cold, hard fact of the contract. They loved me, but they had also bought me. They cared for me, but they owned the rights to my body. It was a horrifying, paradoxical truth that my mind could not reconcile. That evening, we had dinner together, the four of us, in our beautiful formal dining room. The conversation was light, normal. They asked me about my day, about my plans for the weekend. I answered, my voice steady, my smile fixed. I was a spy at my own family dinner, gathering intelligence, looking for cracks in their perfect facade. "You've been quiet tonight, Ava," Ethan said, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Everything okay?" I looked at him, at his kind, familiar face, and a wave of nausea washed over me. "Just tired," I said. "A lot on my mind." "Don't push yourself too hard," my mother said, her voice a soft, gentle command. "Your health is the most important thing." Her words, once a comforting mantra of maternal care, now landed like a threat. My health wasn't just my own. It was a family asset. I looked at the three of them, my loving, perfect family, sitting in the warm glow of the chandelier, and I felt a chill so profound that it was as if the blood had turned to ice in my veins. They were not my family. They were my custodians.
and I had just read the fine print of my own life. Sleep was an impossibility. I lay in my beautiful, spacious bedroom, a room that had been my sanctuary for my entire life, and it felt like a gilded cage. Every object, the plush, comfortable bed, the antique desk where I'd studied, the shelves of books they had encouraged me to read, was a part of the investment. They hadn't just been raising a daughter. They had been curating an asset, ensuring its optimal physical and intellectual development. My mind, free from the performance of the day, was a frantic, chaotic courtroom. The central question, the one that echoed in the silent pre-dawn hours, was about Ethan. Was he a party to this deception, or was he, in his own way, a victim of it? Our bond, the easy, laughing friendship that had been the one constant joy of my life, was now a source of agonizing doubt. Had he always known that the sister he loved was also his designated spare part? I thought back to our childhood, to the scraped knees and shared secrets, the late-night talks, and the fierce, protective loyalty. It felt real. It felt inviolable. But then I remembered the other moments, the ones that now seemed sinister in their new context. His almost obsessive concern for my well-being, the way he would panic over a simple cold, insisting I see a doctor. The time I'd wanted to try out for the high school soccer team, and he had, with a strange, adult-like gravity, talked me out of it, citing the risk of injury. I had thought it was his overprotective, loving nature, a holdover from his own sickly childhood. Now it looked like a shareholder protecting his stock. I had to know. I couldn't move forward, couldn't plan, couldn't even breathe until I knew if the brother I loved was a co-conspirator in the lie of my life. The next day was a Saturday. Our family routine was as predictable as the sunrise. My parents went to the country club for their weekly tennis match, a 4-hour ritual that was as sacred as church. It was my window. Ethan, a creature of habit, would be in the home gym in the West Wing. I found him on the treadmill, headphones on, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead. He smiled when he saw me, a bright, easy smile, and pulled his headphones down around his neck. "Hey, you! Come to join me in a session of glorious torture?" "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice tight. He immediately sensed my seriousness. He slowed the treadmill to a stop, his smile fading, replaced by a look of concern. "Of course. What's wrong? You've been acting weird since yesterday."
I didn't want to have this conversation in the open, not even in our own home. The walls had ears. "Let's go for a walk," I said. "Down to the lake." The lake at the far end of our property had always been our place, a secluded, private world where we had spent countless hours skipping stones and talking about everything and nothing. As we walked, the silence between us was thick with a tension he could feel but couldn't understand. We reached the small, weathered dock and sat on the edge, our feet dangling just above the dark, still water. "Okay, Ava," he said, turning to me, his face open, earnest. "What's going on? You're scaring me." I took a deep breath. There was no way to ease into this. There was only the brutal, direct impact of the truth. I looked him directly in the eye. "I know about the agreement," I said. He frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "What agreement? The prenup? Dad's will? What are you talking about?" He didn't know. The relief that washed over me was so profound it almost made me dizzy. He didn't know. My brother wasn't a monster. He was just a boy whose parents were. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "The agreement they made with my birth mother. The reason they adopted me." I told him. I told him about the safe, the file, the contract. I told him the words asset purchase and organ harvesting. I watched as his face went through a rapid, brutal series of transformations. Confusion gave way to disbelief, disbelief to a dawning, horrified comprehension.
and comprehension to a pale, sickly revulsion. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The color drained from his face. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. They wouldn't. They love you." "They do," I said, a single hot tear rolling down my cheek. "That's the sick part. I think they really truly do love us. But they also own me. They love you so much they bought me as your insurance policy." Ethan looked out at the water, his confident, easygoing posture collapsing. He looked smaller, younger, a boy who had just learned that the entire mythology of his family was a lie. He had been the sickly prince, saved by a miracle. Now he knew he had been the protected asset, and I was the collateral. "My kidney," he said, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. He looked down at his own body as if it were a foreign object. "My kidney condition. They always told me I just grew out of it, that I was lucky." "I think you were," I said, my voice quiet. "I think we both were. As long as you were healthy, I could be a daughter. But if you had gotten sick—" I didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew the answer. I would have ceased to be a sister and would have become a harvest. He stood up, his movements jerky, agitated. He started pacing the small dock, running his hands through his hair. "All this time," he said, his voice rising with a furious, incredulous energy. "All this time they've been watching you, watching us, like we were a science experiment." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes blazing with a new, fierce, protective anger, an anger that was entirely on my behalf. "No," he said, his voice low and firm. "Absolutely not. They don't get to do this. They don't own you, Ava. I don't care what some piece of paper says." In that moment, standing on that dock, the old bond between us, which I had feared was a lie, was forged into something new, something stronger. We were no longer just the perfect, happy children of the Harrington family.
It was to disarm them. We spent the next few days in a flurry of secret, late-night research. We learned everything we could about the legality of such a contract. It was a gray area, a terrifying landscape of ethical loopholes and expensive lawyers. But we found our angle. The contract was predicated on their legal guardianship and medical proxy over me. While the addendum had extended that into my adulthood, it was legally tenuous, a handshake agreement I had never been aware of, let alone consented to. Our plan was simple, direct, and terrifying. It was a declaration of independence. It would not be a quiet, emotional conversation. It would be a formal, legal maneuver, a preemptive strike from which they could not recover. We found a lawyer, a sharp, aggressive woman who specialized in emancipation and medical rights cases. We met her in secret, in her downtown office, and we laid out the entire sordid story, presenting the photos of the contract as our opening argument. She listened, her expression a mixture of professional shock and predatory glee. "This is the most beautifully monstrous thing I have ever seen," she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "And we are going to tear it to shreds." She drafted the documents, a legal notice of contractual nullification, a formal, medically backed declaration of my own bodily autonomy, and, most importantly, a cease and desist letter, legally forbidding them from ever attempting to enact the clauses of the Ancillary medical agreement. The documents were a formal legal declaration that I was not an asset, I was a person. The plan was to serve them the papers at the worst possible time, in the most public possible way, at their annual, high-profile charity gala, an event that was the cornerstone of their public image as benevolent, community-minded philanthropists. We were not just going to disarm them, we were going to do it in a way that guaranteed they could never, ever retaliate without revealing the monstrous truth of what they had done. We were going to use their obsession with their own story against them. The week leading up to the Harrington Charity Gala was the longest, most tension-filled week of my life. I was still living in the house, a smiling, compliant daughter by day, and a silent, determined revolutionary at night. The duplicity was exhausting,
I felt like a deep-cover agent whose extraction was imminent, and every polite conversation, every shared meal was a high-stakes performance. My parents were in their element, a whirlwind of planning and preparation for their biggest social event of the year. The gala, a fundraiser for the children's hospital wing that their family had endowed, was the crown jewel of their public persona. It was an evening dedicated to celebrating their generosity, their community spirit, their perfect, benevolent family. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. They were about to be served a legal document declaring them to be the owners of a human insurance policy at an event celebrating their love for sick children. Ethan was my anchor. His quiet, steady resolve was the only thing that kept me from breaking. We were a united front, moving through our beautiful, gilded cage with a shared, secret purpose. He handled the final communications with our lawyer, a manila envelope containing the legally drafted documents arriving by courier to his private post office box in the city. He hid it in his room, a time bomb waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. The night of the gala arrived. The house was filled with the sense of expensive perfume and quiet, confident power as we prepared. I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, looking at my reflection in the beautiful, designer gown that my mother had insisted on buying me for the occasion. It was a deep sapphire blue, a color that was supposed to highlight my eyes. All I could see was the hollow, terrified look in them. This was the last time I would ever play the part of Ava Harrington, the perfect, grateful daughter. Ethan appeared in my doorway, looking impossibly handsome and impossibly nervous in his tuxedo. He held a thin, elegant-looking portfolio. The bomb was dressed for a black tie affair. "Ready?" he whispered, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "No," I whispered back. "But it's time."
We rode to the gala in the back of our parents' town car, a silent, tense island in the midst of their cheerful, oblivious chatter about guest lists and auction items. When we arrived at the grand ballroom, a sea of flashing cameras and smiling faces, I felt a moment of dizzying panic. We were about to burn down our own lives on live television. We played our parts for the first hour. We smiled, we shook hands. We were the perfect children of the perfect family. I could feel my father's proud gaze on me from across the room, a look that now made my skin crawl. He was so proud of his asset, polished and presented for public viewing. The moment came just after the main course. My father was on stage, at the podium, basking in the warm glow of the spotlight. He was in the middle of a moving, eloquent speech about the importance of family, of community, of protecting the most vulnerable among us. Ethan leaned over to me. "Now," he said. We stood up from our table. A few heads turned, but most of the attention was on the man at the podium. We walked, not towards the exit, but towards the stage. A security guard moved to intercept us, but he recognized us, his expression confused but yielding. We walked up the small set of stairs at the side of the stage. My father, blinded by the spotlight, didn't see us at first. He was just reaching the crescendo of his speech. "And that is why we as a family believe that there is no greater calling than to protect a child's future," he said, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was utterly obscene. That was our cue. Ethan and I stood up from our table. A few heads turned, but most of the attention was on the man at the podium. We walked, not towards the exit, but towards the stage. My father, blinded by the spotlight, didn't see us at first. He was just reaching the crescendo of his speech. "And that is why we as a family believe that there is no greater calling than to protect a child's future," he said, his voice ringing with a sincerity that was utterly obscene. That was our cue. Ethan and I stood up from our table. A few heads turned, but most of the attention was on the man at the podium. We walked, not towards the exit, but towards the stage. My father, blinded by the spotlight, didn't see us at first. He was just reaching the crescendo of his speech. "And that is why we as a family believe that there is no greater calling than to protect a child's future," he said. That was our cue. Ethan and I stepped forward, into the edge of the spotlight, standing beside him at the podium. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. My father turned,
his practiced smile faltering as he saw us. The look on his face was of utter, uncomprehending shock. "Ethan? Ava? What are you doing?" he hissed, his hand covering the microphone. Ethan didn't say a word. He simply placed the elegant portfolio on the podium in front of our father. Then he stepped back, leaving me alone at the microphone, bathed in the sudden, intense silence of 1,000 confused eyes. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras, at the entire world my parents had built. My heart was a frantic, wild thing. But when I spoke, my voice was calm, clear, and steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice echoing through the vast, silent ballroom. But my father left out a very important part of our family's story. I looked at my father, at the man whose face was now a mask of dawning, abject terror. "My name is Ava, and for my entire life I have been a beloved daughter, but I have also been a medical insurance policy." I reached into the portfolio and pulled out the top document. "This," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed, "is a contract, an asset purchase agreement." It seems my brother's future was so important to my parents that they decided to buy him a spare, and I am here tonight to tender my resignation. The silence in the ballroom was a physical entity, a thick, heavy blanket of collective shock. 1,000 people, the city's elite, were frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, horrified fascination. The only sound was the faint, electronic hum of the microphone in my hand. My father stood beside me, petrified, his face a ghastly, ashen color under the warm stage lights. He looked like a statue of a man whose world had just crumbled to dust. I didn't wait for the murmurs to begin. I didn't give him a chance to recover, to formulate a lie, to seize back control of the narrative. I held the contract up for the cameras that were now, I knew, broadcasting this nightmare live to the local news. "This document," I continued, my voice clear and unwavering, "stipulates that my body is not my own. It is a resource, a fallback plan for my brother Ethan." My parents' love, which I have never for a moment doubted, came with a fine print I was never meant to read. The fine print says that my life is conditional. My purpose, in the end, was to be a harvest. I saw my mother, Eleanor, in the audience. She was sitting at the head table, a porcelain statue of a woman, her face a perfect, blank mask of horror. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment I saw not a monster, but a woman trapped in the wreckage of her own monstrous decision. Ethan stepped forward then, taking his place on the other side of the podium. He didn't look at our parents. He looked at me, his expression one of quiet, unwavering support. "I am the beneficiary of this contract," he said, his voice strong, resonant. "I am the son whose life was deemed so important that another life had to be purchased as collateral. I have a rare kidney condition, and I want to make it clear to everyone here tonight, and to my sister, that I would rather die than ever allow this obscenity to be enacted. My health is not worth the price of her humanity." He turned to our father. "We are not your assets," he said, his voice low but carrying through the microphone. "We are your children, and you have failed us both." That was the moment the spell broke. A wave of gasps and frantic whispers rolled through the ballroom. The reporters at the back of the room were no longer just recording. They were scrambling, their faces alight with the frenzied energy of a career-defining scandal. My father, finally jolted from his paralysis, reached for the microphone. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. My children are unwell. They are confused." But the lie was too flimsy, too late. The damage was done. The perfect family, the benevolent philanthropists, had been unmasked on their own stage at their own gala. I placed the legal documents, the formal nullification of the contract and the cease and desist letter, on the podium, in front of him. "We are not confused, Father," I said, my voice soft but final. "We are free." And then Ethan and I, a united front, a rebellion of two, turned our backs on him, on the stage, on the entire life that had been a lie. We walked, side by side, down the stairs and through the stunned, silent crowd. People parted for us as if we were royalty, or perhaps lepers. Their faces were a blur of pity, of shock, of morbid curiosity. We didn't stop. We walked out of the ballroom, out of the hotel, and into the cool, dark night. The city air had never smelled so clean, so real. We had just detonated our lives. We were homeless, familyless, and our future was a vast, terrifying, and utterly blank canvas. But we were free. We were no longer assets. We were just Ava and Ethan. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic, disorienting storm. We stepped out of the ballroom and into a new reality, one where we were the eye of a hurricane of our own making. My phone, which I had turned off before our stage-bound coup, lit up with a relentless barrage of notifications the moment I turned it back on. News alerts, social media tags, hundreds of messages from numbers I didn't recognize. The Harrington gala scandal was the biggest story in the city. We were no longer private citizens. We were a public spectacle. Ethan, with a foresight I lacked, had anticipated this. He had booked us a room in a small, anonymous hotel on the far side of town under a false name. For the first 48 hours, we were fugitives from our own story. We stayed in that room, the television off, the curtains drawn, subsisting on room service and the strange, adrenalized energy of two soldiers after a successful, devastating battle.
Our parents, through a high-priced crisis management team, had released a statement. It was a masterpiece of obfuscation and pity. It spoke of their deep and abiding love for their children and their profound sorrow over our public and painful mental health crises. They claimed the so-called contract was an old, misunderstood legal document from a desperate time, a worst-case scenario that was never intended to be seen, let alone acted upon. They painted themselves as the heartbroken, benevolent parents of two troubled, ungrateful children who had tragically misinterpreted their love as a transaction. Some people bought it. The old guard, the families who had known the Harringtons for generations, publicly rallied to their side. But the court of public opinion was far less forgiving. The words asset purchase, once spoken, could not be unheard. The image of two children publicly disowning their powerful parents was too compelling, too raw to be dismissed as simple hysterics. Our lawyer, the brilliant and ruthless woman who had drafted our legal declaration, became our shield. She handled the press, issuing a single, firm statement. Ava and Ethan Harrington stand by their story. The documents speak for themselves. Their only desire is to be left alone to begin their new lives, free from the contractual obligations of the past. Legally, our parents had no move. To sue us for defamation would be to enter a legal battle where the contract and their entire history of deceit would be subject to discovery. They were trapped. Their only weapon had been the secrecy of their actions, and we had stripped that weapon from them in the most public way imaginable. They were left with nothing but their money and their hollow, tarnished story. The hardest part, for me, was the silence. Not from the world, which was deafeningly loud, but from my parents. There were no angry voicemails, no pleading texts, just a complete and total severance. The love that had been the defining force of my life, the love that had been both my comfort and my cage, was simply gone. It had been switched off, like a light. It was a chilling confirmation of the truth. Their love had always been conditional, and we had just violated the terms and conditions. After a week in hiding, Ethan and I knew we had to face the world. We were legally adults, but we were functionally orphans, with no money, no home, and a last name that was now synonymous with scandal. Ethan, it turned out, was not just a co-conspirator, he was a brilliant strategist. He said,
They controlled us with money. Our comfort, our education, our entire existence was funded by them. We need to cut that cord. We need to be completely, financially independent. He had a trust fund, a smaller one set up by our grandfather that was legally his, outside of our parents' control. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Without a moment's hesitation, he had the entire amount transferred to a new, joint account under both our names. "This isn't my money," he said, his expression serious, as he showed me the new bank statement. "This is our money. This is the seed money for our new lives. You and me, we're the family now, Ava. We're all we've got." The gesture was so profound, so absolute in its loyalty, that it brought tears to my eyes. The family I had been born into had purchased me. The family I had chosen, the one sitting next to me in a cheap hotel room, was giving me half of everything he had without a second thought. We had lost a family, but we had found each other. And for the first time, in the midst of the chaos and the uncertainty, I felt a flicker of something that felt like hope. The year that followed our public detonation was a crash course in reality. Ethan and I, the children who had been raised in a gilded cage, were now learning to fly on our own, with wings that were still unsteady. We used the money from his trust fund to get a small, unassuming apartment in a city 1,000 miles away, a place where the name Harrington meant nothing. It was a life of firsts. Our first time grocery shopping on a budget.
Our first time scrubbing our own bathroom, unclogging a drain, navigating the confusing labyrinth of public transportation. Every small, mundane act of self-sufficiency was a quiet victory, a reclamation of the normal life we had been denied. We were not just siblings, we were partners in the messy, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying project of building a life from scratch. Ethan, free from the suffocating narrative of being the miraculous survivor, thrived. He enrolled in a local university, not studying business as our father had dictated, but pursuing his hidden passion for architecture. He was no longer a protected asset. He was just a young man, finally free to design a future of his own making. My own path was less clear. The postgraduate program I had been applying for, the one that had started this entire avalanche, felt like a relic from a different life, the ambition of a different person. The trauma of the revelation, the knowledge that my body had been considered a commodity, lingered. For a long time, I felt a strange detachment from my own physical self, as if I were a tenant in a property that still, on some deep cellular level, felt like it belonged to someone else. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, the same kind of place that had given us our start. I found a quiet, fierce satisfaction in helping people navigate the dense, intimidating language of the law, helping them find their voice in a system designed to silence them. I was drawn to the stories of those who had been exploited, whose rights had been overwritten by the powerful. I wasn't just helping them, I was healing myself, rewriting my own story, one case at a time. I enrolled in law school. We never heard from our parents directly. The silence from them was a gaping, unbreachable chasm. I saw them sometimes in glossy magazines or on financial news networks, their faces smiling, their public persona of benevolent philanthropists meticulously reconstructed. They were a testament to the fact that with enough money and enough power, you can survive any story. But I knew, and they knew that I knew, the monstrous truth that lay beneath the perfect, polished surface. The real ending, the one that mattered, came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon 2 years after the gala. An official-looking letter arrived, forwarded from our lawyer's office. It was a legal document from the Harrington family trust. A single, sterile page informed me that a new medical directive had been signed by my parents. It was a formal, legally binding relinquishment of any and all medical proxy rights over me, superseding all previous agreements. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. There was no emotion, no remorse. It was a business transaction. They were formally writing off a failed asset. But to me, it was the most important document I had ever read. It was my declaration of emancipation. The contract was finally, officially, dead. I live my life now not as a fairy tale, but as a testament to the messy, complicated, and sometimes brutal reality of what it means to be human.
My family is not one of blood or of contract, but one of choice. It is Ethan. It is the friends we have made. It is the life we have built, a life whose value is not determined by a signature on a dotted line. I am not an asset. I am not a contingency plan. I am my own person, the sole undisputed owner of my own body, my own future. And that is a form of wealth my parents will never understand. My story was an extreme, almost unbelievable case of parental love twisting into a monstrous form of ownership. It makes me wonder about the subtle ways we all belong to each other. So I have to ask, where is the line between loving someone and owning them?
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.